I was a little worried when I first clicked on this album and saw on Apple Music that it was listed under the category of art rock, because usually what putting art in front of something that's clearly art means is that this is ass, but if you don't pretend to like it, you're an uncultured swine and have no taste. I'm happy to report that was not the case with this album.
Art music. A friend of mine from high school who saw I was listening to Rush, he was like, oh, have you ever heard of King Crimson? He showed me this album. I only listened to like 2 songs, so I was like, okay, it's not bad. But now as we've dove deeper into Prog, it's definitely important to get into this one because a lot of people credit this with being the start of progressive rock.
There is a lot of inspiration taken, as we were talking about with Rush and Dream Theater, from those bands. This is really like the grandfather of those bands. I posted the meme about Haken with the Dream Theater and then the Rush. This is kind of like the Spider-Man for Rush. Without further bullshit, let's get into track 1. I always love when a song starts out with sound effects. It's a nice detail that sets the setting for a song, which is not something you hear too often. I expected this to be a jazz fusion record, but I was not expecting this much jazz fusion. There are points of the record where it almost sounds like a jazz group with rock fusion mixed in.
As I listened to it, I was like, oh man, am I at a jazz hall? I
Freeform
really
jazz.
thought... I love the complete mix they do. Like at first it starts off like the classical, drums, guitar, bass, whatever, keyboards, and then you hear the woodwind, the other brass instruments, and I was like, oh shit, okay, this is pretty cool. Seriously, it really doesn't sound like something from 1969. Did you know that this song was sampled in Kanye West's Power?
I was just about to say that. I had one of those Leo DiCaprio meme moments when I heard that, because I'm like, oh shit, that's where he got it from. Well, there are a few Prog albums that predate this album. There weren't many putting down such a crazy technical and eccentric instrumental bridge. That instrumental bridge also happens to be the birth of every second half of every Dream Theater song ever written. The walkie-talkie vocal effects add a really interesting dynamic that's been copied countless times in modern alternative music with groups like AWOL Nation. And sure, there are parts that sounded like the scene in SpongeBob where Squidward swallowed his clarinet, but overall I genuinely was not expecting to like this song as much as I do, especially given my past experience with art. So I give it an 8.
A combination of their jazz, classical, and prog. You can't really go into this and come out of it and not be a different person for listening to it. So I would also have to give it an 8.
Yeah, I volunteered right after I heard this song. Being that this album has only 5 tracks, it's more of a challenge to diversify a track list, but King Crimson does that perfectly on I Talk to the Wind. The inclusion of non-traditional rock instruments we've seen so far in the album make a much more interesting listen than your standard guitar, bass, and drums, even though Rush is pretty cool. And that theme continues over with the flutes throughout the song.
Yeah, the woodwind was excellent. Whoever they had, I think they had it down here on the flute.
There's actually a very, very talented member of this group. His name is McDonald, and he did most of the crazy instruments on here. So he was impressive as hell, not only in the sense that he was able to play, the flute, clarinet, bass clarinet, saxophone, vibraphone, guitar, mayonnaise, and horseradish, but he can also play them pretty damn well.
This was an interesting track to come off the first one. It was very laid back and nice. And the flute, you really don't hear too much flute in many bands. They talk about people's concerning doubts in religion and holiness and greater good, and God is basically being portrayed as the wind, saying like, I talk to the wind. You can't really see it.
The softer feel is a nice change of pace from the first track as it questions the meaning of religious and natural forces like you were talking about. The steady beat held by percussionist Michael Gills was a perfect backdrop to the majestic melody provided by the harmonizing wind instruments and electric piano throughout. A beautiful song and one I plan on coming back to, so I give it an 8 as well.
Took the words right out of my mouth.
The heavy use of the mellotron, which was a relatively new instrument at the time. Really, really cool instrument. It's a keyboard variation, kind of, except you got to press really deep for it to make a sound. But I'm not like a mellotron expert, so I probably sound like an idiot. What it does is it rubs a tape roll over this piece that gives it a certain sound. It gives it a string sound. So throughout the entire background, you probably heard a lot of the string sounds. That's what the mellotron is.
See, that's what's really cool is they're bringing stuff to the table that nobody else does.
It gives the song an amazing background layer and it sounds similar to having an orchestra playing. The song is different in that every instrument feels like it's more than just part of a song, but different layers by themselves, which is showcased in the many times the song slows down and builds up to some of the greatest and grandest parts of the record. The acoustic guitar and mellotron sound incredible together. It has an excellent song structure with a ton of build-ups. They also know when to bring it down as well. This is one of the better prog epics I've ever heard, and my favorite on the record, so I give it a 9.
I have to give this one an 8.
Some of the ambience immediately spills into Moonchild with the soft, dreamy guitar and flute. The transition around 2:30 with the music cuts out, but the ringing resonates in the right ear, demonstrates immense attention to detail put into the song as it transitions into the gentle guitar section.
That is awesome attention to detail. Once again, a continuation of the really soft, somber, and also awesome flute.
The song takes an interesting turn during the illusion where it appears that a cat broke into the studio and started running across all the instruments.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to say that.
Listening back to it a second time, I really appreciated it. The first time I heard it going into it, I had no idea that it was improv. And usually in improv sessions, like with freeform jazz, they usually have all kinds of noise going on at the same time. Everyone's trying to like outshow each other. It just sounds like a car accident. But here, they're all so subtle and quiet, know exactly when to come in and exactly where to put each part.
They were still able to put it together solidly and not have it be this jumbled mess and be like, oh shit, when do I come in and what should I do here?
There were, however, some nice guitar licks from Robert Fripp sprinkled in, and the outro was a nice return to the dreaming feel from the beginning. So I give it a 7.
I gave this one a 7 as well.
The structure of this song definitely shaped many progressive tracks that came afterwards, like Close to the Edge, 2112, and Octavarium, the latter of which drawing sonic comparisons as well with heavy flute use.
You want to know how it's abbreviated?
Itcock.
I don't know who thought that was a good idea. This song is definitely by every means an epic. It's split up into 4 verses divided by an instrumental section, which is the return of the fire witch, and then there's the massive climax, and then it kind of calms down, and then right when you think it's going to end, explodes again with an awesome outro.
The big backing vocals to the hook were a nice touch, and the mellotron use is heavy and goes really nicely this time with the electric piano. The song ended about 3 times before the recorder said nah. I love the touch to finish the song with the same sound effects from the beginning. Again, attention to detail. Solid conclusion to the record. I give it a 7.5.
There's a massive epic conclusion to the album. Explosion of Prog. I give it an 8.
Overall, it's easy to see why this record was so influential. I genuinely was not expecting to like this as much as I did, especially when I saw the art branding. But it really was a special album, ahead of its time, influential, and that's the benefit of the style of reviews that we do, where we do more legacy reviews rather than new releases most of the time, is that we can look back and look at the influence, which is a key factor in rating this album, and a key factor in my rating, which is 8.5.
Going into it, I was like, I don't really know. Like, they seem kind of weird. I don't really know if I'm going to like this. I'm glad it was blown out of the water, because once I listened to it, I could really see the talent, the effort, the musicianship, the determination to really start what we know as today as Prog. I don't think any of the members of Rush, DT, Yes, or Haken have not listened to at least some of their work, because it really is influential to what they do, and they almost sound similar in certain aspects. So I'd have to give it an 8. And the last thing I wanted to ask to see, I want to see if you could answer, what would you say to people who are afraid to get into Prog, or like kind of just don't want to even try listening to it?
I'd say suck my it cock.